This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Check out Squarespace through the link in the description below. More in a minute. It was once one of the greatest cities in the whole of North America. Around 1000 AD, multiple tribes from the Mississippian culture descended on an Illinois floodplain ready to build. Almost overnight, they threw up an unprecedentedly complex urban society, covering 4,000 acres and housing up to 20,000 people. The city at its height was not only bigger than any other north of the Rio Grande, it dwarfed even European icons like London and Paris. Dominated by grand earthen mounds that soared up to 100 feet into the air, it was simply one of the greatest settlements of its era. Yet it's not just its size or complexity that makes Cahokia so fascinating, but what happened to it. When first visited by Europeans in 1540, the site was already long abandoned by its original inhabitants. So what caused these pre-Columbian peoples to walk away from this once bustling metropolis? The answer lies in the spellbinding tale of America's forgotten ancient megacity. A stone's throw from St. Louis, Illinois, lies one of the strangest, most underrated heritage sites in America. Covering some 4,000 acres immediately south of the Dwight D. Eisenhower Highway, the pre-Columbian settlement of Cahokia is a place like no other. For a millennium now, nearly 120 vast earthen mounds have stood here, some reaching heights of 100 feet. Around them are the traces of what was once a vast and bustling city, a place that drew people from across the region. Yet the reasons for its building, or what its builders called themselves, have been lost to time. Even its modern name, Cahokia, is likely a later invention. In many ways, both the life and death of America's first great city remain a tantalizing mystery. The story of Cahokia starts with the rise of what we today call the Mississippian Culture, a catch-all term for the Native American tribes living around the Mississippi, Ohio, and Tennessee River valleys. Rather than being one great monolith, Mississippian culture covers a wide, diverse set of peoples, many of whom harvested wildly different crops and lived wildly different lives. Despite this, though, there is one thing that seems to have united them. The Mississippians appear to have loved nothing more than building themselves giant earthen mounds. From around 3400 BC, when the Ouachita mounds were first built in Louisiana, Mississippian people seem to have engaged in a millennia-long building spree. The reasons for this are unclear, but probably had something to do with religion, the mounds perhaps allowing priests or chiefs to be elevated closer to the sun. They also allowed for greater civic organization than the area had ever previously seen. The thing about building a whacking great pyramid of earth is that it's not something you can just knock up in a drunken afternoon. At a time when everything would have to be carried by hand in woven baskets, such construction work would have required a strong central authority, a good grasp of logistics, and the ability to produce excess food to stop all your builders from starving to death. But it would be in the creation of Cahokia that these organizational skills really reached their peak. Interestingly, there's little in the early history of Cahokia to suggest why it became so important. Originally founded around 700 AD, it probably started life as just another village on the Illinois floodplain, one notable only for the success its inhabitants had in farming corn. For some historians, though, this choice of crop was likely key to the site's future. Around 900 AD, a climactic shift saw increased rainfall in the central Mississippi Valley. For pre-Columbian dudes living there, at first it was probably a case of, great, more damn rain. But that opinion would have quickly shifted. See, excess rainfall means an excess of corn, which in turn means a surplus, which in turn means an easy way to feed people working on gigantic construction projects. By 950 AD, we can find a specific carbon isotope in skeletons from this era, one which strongly suggests everyone was chowing down on way more corn than previously. And that's important because 950 AD is just before Cahokia exploded. Just 50 years later, work began on the biggest earthen mound in the city, the one known today as Monk's Mound. It was the start of something called the Big Bang, an era when thousands of diverse peoples would suddenly flood into Cahokia, working in unison to build the greatest city this side of the Rio Grande. By the time they'd finished, the history of pre-Columbian America would have been completely transformed. For archaeologists studying Cahokia, the craziest thing about the Big Bang isn't the way this random village suddenly transformed into a bustling metropolis. It's not even the sheer number of earthen mounds that builders managed to construct. It's the fact that they did all this to a preconceived urban plan. From the moment work started on the Monk's Mound, Cahokia seems to have been a pre-planned city, like Brasilia without the modern architecture, or Canberra without the drunken Aussies. The centre was oriented east-west, using the positions of the sun and moon to give it its layout. It was also built systematically. This wasn't some free-for-all, with people working on their own plots at their own pace. Rather, it seems like everyone coordinated to finish the Monk's Mound first, before moving on to other structures. And this is just scratching the surface of what makes the building of Cahokia so fascinating. For one thing, there's no sign of forced labor. That means participation must have been voluntary, perhaps on the basis that this was some great spiritual undertaking. The workforce, too, was extremely multicultural, combining several distinct peoples found throughout the Mississippian culture, from the Choctaw to the Natchez. In fact, it's estimated up to a third of Cahokia's inhabitants hailed from some far-off tribe. Impressive as all this is, though, it has nothing on the city itself. Within 50 years, scores of vast earthen mounds had been completed alongside a grand plaza and residential districts. Before a century was out, Cahokia had grown big enough to rival London in size. It would be another 7 centuries before any other city in America or Canada grew so big. At least, that's the general consensus. We should note here that there are some historians who think we've all been overestimating Cahokia's size, and that it never really grew beyond 10,000 people rather than the 20,000 commonly cited. Still, even at the lower end of that scale, Cahokia would have been huge for its time and place. And a great deal of the awe that inspired would have been thanks to the structures themselves. Of these, the greatest, without a doubt, was the Monk's Mound. A later name given in the 18th century when Trappist monks tended gardens on its sides, with no idea what the Monk's Mound was called by Cahokia's inhabitants. But we do know it must have been unbelievably important. Standing at 100 foot tall, the mound held the record of the tallest man-made structure in America until 1867. That means that Abraham Lincoln might have said, "That's the biggest building I've ever seen."
I've never seen the like of it before.
And it wasn't just impressive in height. Containing 22 million cubic feet of soil, the Monk's Mound has a larger base than even the Great Pyramid at Giza. Since Mississippian cultures had no beasts of burden, all this earth had to be carried by hand in woven baskets, a certainly back-breaking task. Yet it's beneath this outward coating of earth that the mound's true genius lies. The core of the Monk's Mound is a gigantic block of clay, a curious choice since Cahokia stands on a floodplain and clay is an absolute demon at absorbing water. This means it swells when wet and shrinks when dry, a perfect storm for cracking and ultimately destroying any structures that are built from it. Incredibly, the Cahokians didn't just understand this instability, they constructed a perfect mechanism for dealing with it. By exposing the slab to wet ground, they allowed it to remain constantly damp through water absorption. To stop this water then evaporating away, they sealed the slab's top with alternating layers of sand and clay, a mixture that also allowed rainwater to drain away rather than further moisten it. The result was a clay slab kept at a constant size. It was no longer plagued by instability, and it was strong enough to last 1,000 years. It was an impressive start to Cahokia, a sign that the ancient builders clearly knew what they were doing. But it wasn't the only great project undertaken in this ancient city. In no time at all, the Mississippians would have squeezed enough wonders in their sight to rival anywhere else on Earth. Now, if you're looking to build an online wonder, it's time to head over to our friends at Squarespace. Now more than ever, people are getting creative with their time. They're reaching deep into their savings accounts to start a new business or launch a new blog or something like that. And with Squarespace, the world is yours. It's the perfect web tool to build a website of whatever you want. It's the platform to use when you're ready to get started on the next web project that you've been thinking about. You're looking to get in and out quick without thinking too much about what your website should look like. Bam! Use one of their quick and beautiful templates to make a website that's fresh and for you, like it's right out of the box. Or maybe you're more of a hands-on person, you got lots of opinions and ideas about exactly what your site should look like. Squarespace gives you all of the customization options you could ever want with no updates, no patches, no technical BS to worry about. And once you're done setting up your website, tinkering with the design if you're so inclined, or maybe just playing around with the colors, there's so many extra features that Squarespace provides so that your website can thrive. Email campaigns, patronage portals, social integrations, member-only areas, analytics, commercial options, 24/7 support. Everything you could want is in one place. So when you're ready to get started on the next web project of yours, big or small, it involves a website, do it with Squarespace. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/geographics, and you'll get 10% of your first purchase of a website or a domain. And now let's get back to the video. If you ever find yourself with both access to a time machine and a burning desire to party, you could do worse than setting the controls to Cahokia's Grand Plaza in the 12th century. A 50-acre sweep of land surrounded by pyramids of earth, the Grand Plaza was capable of holding up to 10,000 people during festivals. And festivals in Cahokia made Burning Man look like a bunch of wankers in a sandpit. Days before the festival began, food and drink would be sourced from far and wide and carried into the city in a great procession. Traces of the highly caffeinated Yabon holly have been found on beaker shards, a plant that only grew hundreds of miles away and likely took great effort to collect. Not that festival goers were only interested in getting caffeinated. Analysis of the city's waste pits have found people would gorge themselves on food throughout the festivities. A single spectacular event is thought to have seen over 2,000 deer eaten. It's thought dozens of cooks would work in shifts to keep everyone fed, while all around them people danced, placed bets on games, and watched athletes perform amazing physical feats. There may even have been intricate sky dances like the ones that still take place in Mexico, in which participants tied themselves to a tall pole and leapt off in a feat of soaring acrobatics. At the very least, the existence of these poles suggests some vital ritual took place involving them. But hey, maybe parties aren't your thing. Maybe you dig more spiritual stuff. In that case, you could skip the festivities at the Grand Plaza and take your time machine straight to Woodhenge. A series of timber circles, the biggest of which had a diameter of about 410 feet, Woodhenge gets its name from the way its 48 posts line up with the solar calendar, similar to Stonehenge. Every equinox, the sight lines from the center of the henge mean the sun appears to rise out of the front of the monk's mound, suggesting that this was a place of religious significance. Today it's thought people gathered here for rituals every equinox and solstice, marking the passage of time through the motion of the sun and the moon. In fact, the whole of Cahokia may have been built for similar spiritual purposes. University of Illinois architect Timothy Pauketat has noted that the meeting of water and dry land holds symbolism for many modern cultures descended from the Cahokians. As a city built across a floodplain, he suggests Cahokia may have been intended to represent the barrier between the worlds of the living and the dead, with burial mounds built at the wettest places. It's possible then that the entire city was meant to be a spiritual crossroads, a place where the ghosts of forgotten ancestors were always close. Not that every mound was a burial site, or everyone in Cahokia was only there for religious purposes. Some mounds were topped with the homes of the wealthy, while outlying districts provided thousands of regular folk with a place to live year-round. All of which naturally raises a question. What was daily life here really like? One of the slightly galling things about researching Cahokia is that its inhabitants had no written language and left behind no records. While this isn't all that unusual for an ancient people, it does mean our understanding is limited to what excavations can tell us. Luckily, archaeology has still uncovered enough to afford us a fascinating glimpse of locals' lives. Outside of the Grand Plaza in the town centre, most of those in Cahokia lived in relative simplicity. The homes were usually single-room affairs, some 15 foot long, with walls made of posts covered with mats and a roof made from thatch. Each of these homes was clustered around a communal courtyard, which formed the backbone of its neighbourhood, a place where the women met to socialise, make pottery, or weave mats during the day. The men, by contrast, probably spent their time hunting, clearing trees, chopping wood, and helping store corn. Not that Cahokia only survived by importing food for storage. The wider area was surrounded by farmland, part of a region we might call Greater Cahokia, where possibly another 20,000 to 30,000 lived. But while the city was mostly agricultural, it also appears to have engaged in trade. Various digs have uncovered shells brought all the way from the Gulf of Mexico alongside copper from the Great Lakes. Whether it dominated its local region as an all-powerful overlord, though, or was simply a place through which goods and people flowed, is unknown. Still, life at Cahokia seems to have been pleasant enough, with time off for socializing and playing games, the most interesting of which has to be Chunkey. A deceptively simple sport, Chunkey involved rolling a round stone disc across the grounds. Before the stone could stop, participants would hurl sticks at it, trying to land closest and win a point. As they did this, they'd be surrounded by a crowd of people shouting bets until astronomical sums had been wagered. They got so big it wasn't uncommon for losers to commit suicide rather than pay up. But if that sounds a little grim, well, you need to know that death was just a part of what made Cahokia tick. By that, we mean evidence has been uncovered that its residents practiced human sacrifice. Mound 72, as it's known today, is clearly a burial mound of some kind, one dedicated to a powerful dead dude called Birdman. We can tell ancient Michael Keaton was important because he was buried with the bodies of 53 women who seem to have been sacrificed for this purpose. But the bloodletting at Cahokia doesn't seem to have stopped there. There's evidence of mass graves containing scores of young women who appear to have been ritually strangled, alongside at least one pit containing several men who were beaten to death. Exactly what role all this killing played in Cahokia's culture is impossible to say, but we know for a fact that the city was likely steeped in violence. Over a single century, starting in 1175, the defensive stockade circling the city was rebuilt again and again. So why would they go to such an effort? Well, the obvious answer seems to be that there was something, probably another tribe, but possibly Shoggoths, that the inhabitants were desperately trying to keep out. Curiously though, no arrowheads or signs of warfare have ever been found within Cahokia. Rather than violence itself, it seems it was the threat of violence which encouraged the Mississippians to reinforce their city. Warfare or no warfare though, Cahokia's luck would eventually run out. Although it had only sprang into being around 1000 AD, reaching its height a mere century later, America's greatest pre-Columbian city was almost at its end. By the time the Europeans finally showed up like the world's worst house guests, bearing gifts of genocide and smallpox, Cahokia's time would already be over. Until recently, we thought we knew what had caused Cahokia's collapse. A widely accepted theory proposed that extensive deforestation by the inhabitants had led to increased flooding which destroyed crops and spread disease. In 2021, though, a new study published in the journal Geoarchaeology revealed no evidence of widespread flooding around the time of the city's decline. Which isn't to say the environment didn't play some role in Cahokia's abandonment. For example, there's evidence a major drought hit the region in Cahokia's final decades, potentially placing pressure on flood stocks. On the other hand, it also looks like there was a serious earthquake sometime in the 13th century that could have driven people away. Or hey, maybe the evidence of warfare in the surrounding region explains why everyone fled. Or maybe it was a combination of a whole ton of things until finally the hungry, earthquake-struck residents were all like, you know what, screw this stupid place, let's leave. The fact is, we basically don't know what killed Cahokia. All we know is that sometime between 1350 and 1400, its remaining inhabitants packed their bags and dispersed among the other Mississippian cultures, leaving behind a dead city of silent mounds. For anyone stood in Cahokia at this time, that silence must have been immense. The sort of silence you could only get in places built for life, which have now been emptied of people. It was a silence that reached beyond the confines of the city itself and deep into folklore. As you'll remember if you watched our Cascadia earthquake video, Native American oral traditions often preserve tales of great calamities, from tsunamis to civilizational destruction. But in the case of Cahokia, there's nothing. No cycle of legends that explain why America's greatest pre-Columbian city might have fallen. In fact, it never seems to be mentioned at all. Yet that doesn't mean Cahokia was entirely forgotten. Sometime in the early 1500s, within a century or a century and a half of its abandonment, Cahokia was reoccupied, this time by tribes of the Illinois Confederation. By the time the first European to reach this area, Hernando de Soto, stumbled across the city in 1540, Cahokia was once again home to a steady population. Crucially though, the Native Americans the Europeans encountered in the ruins had no idea who built Cahokia, and that allowed Europeans to come up with all sorts of crazy-ass theories. The thing was, the city's mounds were impressive, so impressive that it was considered beyond the skill of Native Americans. So, white people twisted themselves in knots trying to demonstrate how the real builders must have been Vikings or Egyptians or one of the lost tribes of Israel. But that was when they paid attention to them at all, even as Cahokia's new population shrank through a combination of disease and warfare, eventually evaporating away to nothing in the early 1800s. Those settling in America showed a remarkable lack of interest in this incredible site. Of course, there were exceptions. In 1811, Henry Brackenridge wrote a superlative account of the mounds, comparing them to the pyramids of Egypt. But because he was firmly of the opinion that the builders were Native Americans, most of the press ignored him. Even when he got his close friend Thomas Jefferson to conduct a survey and corroborate his findings, people were still like, Indians built that? Don't be ridiculous. It was probably aliens, or Romans, or Jesus. The worst part? This ignorance had consequences. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 was predicated on the idea that Native Americans were incapable of being civilized. By portraying the great civilization of Cahokia as the work of an unknown race, worse, claiming the native tribes had evidently exterminated that race, the US would justify all the cruelties of the Trail of Tears. You know that Joni Mitchell lyric about how they paved paradise and put up a parking lot? Well, that's kind of how old-timey folk treated the ruins of Cahokia. In 1931, for example, a bunch of horseradish farmers carried away the ancient city's second biggest mound for fill. Unearthed pyramids that had survived 1,000 years, destroyed just to help grow more of the world's second worst condiment. Still, in some ways, this was fortunate. Nearby St. Louis was originally nicknamed Mound City thanks to all the building done there by Cahokia's neighbors. By the late 19th century, the mounds had been leveled, used for soil by railroad workers. Nor did the desecration stop there. Over the decades, Cahokia itself was used for everything from an airfield to the site of a drive-in, which mostly showed pornography. Even today, the Collinsville Road still runs right smack through the middle of the ancient plaza. While this is galling though, there's only so much anger we can muster for the roads bisecting Cahokia. After all, there was a road, which ultimately saved the site from any more destruction. Prior to the 1950s, the only protected part of Cahokia was Monk's Mound, which had been made a tiny state park in 1925. But then President Eisenhower came along with his plan to build a massive network of interstate highways, a plan that came with millions of dollars earmarked for archaeological surveys along each road's route. It was this provision and the arrival of I-55/70 that finally made America sit up and take note of Cahokia's heritage. The archaeological digs revealed that this wasn't just some handy place for getting soil to grow horseradish, but a site where thousands upon thousands of people had once lived, worked, and died in an era lost to time. The revelations from the highway program dig were so fascinating that the area was designated as a National Historic Landmark in 1964. Jump forward 18 years and it was added to UNESCO's list of World Heritage Sites. Fast forward to today, and the importance of Cahokia is widely recognized. Every year, some dig or study teaches us something new about what was, for centuries, the largest city in American history. We're constantly uncovering fascinating stories about the Mississippians who built it. And yet, in some senses, Cahokia is just as neglected as it's ever been. In nearby St. Louis, the Gateway Arch has been standing only since 1965. It's an impressive enough structure with a great view at the top, a view that allows it to pull in over 2 million visitors annually. By contrast, Cahokia, just 14 minutes drive away, clocks barely 200,000 visitors in an average year. And it's a number that's falling. Think about that for a second. Here, we have one of the most important sites in US history, perhaps the only American site that could compete with somewhere like Stonehenge or Newgrange. And yet, it remains almost unknown by the general public for 90% of tourists who never even dream of venturing beyond the Gateway Arch. We could go on bemoaning the neglect, playing the grumpy old man wondering why kids today don't care about history. But maybe it's unnecessary. Today, protected and restored, Cahokia could speak for itself. Just one glance is enough to appreciate the magic of this place, to see the inarguable evidence of the advanced society that once existed here. The culture that built it might be long gone, but the architectural works they left behind remain impressive to this very day. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.